On the morning of August the 6th, 1945, a man named Tsutomu Yamaguchi was walking to work in Hiroshima. He looked up and saw a single aircraft flying high overhead. Then he saw two small objects fall from it. The sky turned white and the world exploded. When he opened his eyes, the city around him had ceased to exist. His eardrums had burst. His arms were severely burned. He could hear almost nothing. The atomic bomb had flattened 5 square miles of Hiroshima and killed 80,000 people in a single second. Yamaguchi was 3 kilometers from the center. The fact that he was alive was almost mathematically impossible. Over the next 2 days, he dragged himself through the ruins, found a functioning train, and went home. Home was Nagasaki. 3 days after surviving the first atomic bomb, he was sitting in his boss's office reporting for work. While he was still speaking, the window turned white for the second time in 3 days. The second atomic bomb had just hit Nagasaki. Tsutomu Yamaguchi had just survived 2 atomic bombs dropped on 2 different cities in 3 days. And somehow, he went on to live until the age of 93. This is the story of the man who survived the impossible twice and spent the rest of his life making sure the world never forgot it. To understand how one man ended up at the center of both atomic bombs, you need to understand the war that made them possible. By 1945, Japan had been at war for over a decade. It had invaded China, Korea, and most of Southeast Asia. The war in the Pacific between Japan and the United States had already killed millions of people on both sides. American military planners estimated that an invasion of the Japanese mainland could cost over 1 million Allied lives. In secret, the United States had spent 3 years and $2 billion building something that had never existed before. The Manhattan Project had created the atomic bomb, a weapon so powerful it could destroy an entire city in a single explosion. In July 1945, they tested it in the New Mexico desert. The explosion was seen from 200 kilometers away. President Truman authorized its use against Japan, hoping it would end the war without an invasion of the mainland. A committee drew up a list of Japanese cities as potential targets. Hiroshima was chosen because of its military significance and its geography. Hiroshima was a major military headquarters with a population of around 350,000 people. It had never been heavily bombed, which made it ideal for measuring the bomb's full effect. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a 29-year-old naval engineer working for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. He designed oil tankers. In late July 1945, Mitsubishi sent him to Hiroshima for a 3-month work assignment. He had been there for nearly 3 months and was almost finished. He was due to return home to Nagasaki in 2 days. He had a wife and a young son waiting for him. On the night of August 5th, 1945, Yamaguchi went to sleep, having no idea what was coming in the morning. The next morning, he left for work just before 7 a.m. It was a clear, sunny Tuesday. It felt like an ordinary day. Hiroshima that morning looked like any other working day. The trams were running, people were going to work, children were heading to school. Yamaguchi reached the tram stop and realized he had forgotten his personal stamp, which he needed to authorize documents at the office. He turned around and walked back through an open field near the Mitsubishi shipyard. This decision is why he survived. At 8:15 a.m., he heard the sound of a single aircraft and looked up. He saw it release 2 small objects attached to parachutes. He had about 40 seconds while those parachutes fell. He did not know what they were. The atomic bomb detonated 580 meters above the city center with the force of 15,000 tons of dynamite. Everything within 2 kilometers was instantly destroyed. The shockwave reached Yamaguchi in less than a second. It picked him up and threw him across the field like a piece of paper. He hit the ground hard. His eardrums had ruptured. Both arms were burned from the wrist to the shoulder. He was temporarily blinded. In that one moment, the bomb had killed 80,000 people instantly. Tens of thousands more would die in the following weeks from burns and radiation. Yamaguchi was 3 kilometers from the explosion. He was alive. He could not understand how. The city around him had vanished. Streets that had existed minutes ago were buried under rubble. The air tasted like burning metal. He made his way to the Otter River, where thousands of survivors had gathered. Many were so severely burned, their skin was hanging from their bodies. In the chaos, he found 2 colleagues from Mitsubishi who had also survived the blast. Together, they began looking for somewhere safe. They made their way to a train station and found a section of the building that was still partially standing. They decided to shelter there for the night. That night, they sheltered as fires burned across what remained of the city. The temperature had dropped, and they had almost nothing to protect them from the cold. Yamaguchi could not sleep. His burns were agonizing, his eardrums were ruptured, and the world was muffled and distant. He thought he was going to die. He later described lying in the dark that night, looking at the sky through the broken roof and thinking the world had come to an end. The next morning, they found a first aid post where volunteers were treating the injured with whatever supplies remained. His arms and head were bandaged. On August 8th, 2 days after the bomb, Yamaguchi managed to board a train back to Nagasaki. The journey took most of the day on damaged tracks. He arrived home after dark. His wife opened the door, saw the state of him, and burst into tears. He had made it back. For one day, Yamaguchi rested at home in Nagasaki. His family was around him. His city was normal and undamaged. He was safe. Nagasaki had not been bombed. Life there continued as it had. People went to work, shops were open, the streets were quiet. But Yamaguchi could not separate himself from what he had seen. The smell of Hiroshima was still on him. He had watched a city disappear. On the morning of August 9th, still heavily bandaged and barely recovered, he reported to his Mitsubishi office in Nagasaki. He felt he had to. The people of Nagasaki knew about Hiroshima, but did not fully understand what had happened there. News and information were tightly controlled by the military. His supervisor looked up at the bandaged man sitting across from him and asked what on earth had happened. Yamaguchi explained everything. The plane, the parachutes, the white flash, the shockwave that threw him across a field. The bomb that destroyed an entire city in 1 second. His supervisor told him he was clearly delirious from his injuries. One bomb cannot destroy an entire city. That is not possible, Yamaguchi insisted. He stood up. He told his boss he had seen it. With his own eyes, he described the mushroom cloud. He described the silence. And then, at 11:02 a.m., the window turned white. The second atomic bomb, Fat Man, detonated over Nagasaki, 3.5 kilometers from where Yamaguchi was sitting. For the second time in 4 days, an atomic bomb had thrown him across a room. He lay there, in the rubble of the office. He was alive. He had no explanation for why. He pulled himself out of the wreckage. His bandages had been blown off. His previous burns were now exposed again. He looked up and saw the mushroom cloud rising above Nagasaki. He later said it looked identical to the one he had seen over Hiroshima. The bomb had killed 40,000 people instantly in Nagasaki. Another 30,000 would die in the following months from burns and radiation. Yamaguchi walked through the ruins looking for his family. He did not know if his wife and son were alive. He reached his neighborhood. Some streets were still intact. He ran. His wife and son had survived. They had hidden in a tunnel shelter. When they heard the air raid warning, his family was alive. He had now survived 2 atomic bombs. Both of his cities had been destroyed. His family was alive. He had no words for any of it. In the weeks after the bombings, Yamaguchi's condition collapsed. Radiation sickness had taken hold of his body. His hair fell out. He developed a severe fever. His wounds refused to heal. He stopped eating. His wife and mother feared he would not survive the weeks after the bombings, even though the bombs themselves had not killed him. On August the 15th, Emperor Hirohito made a radio broadcast announcing Japan's unconditional surrender. Most Japanese civilians had never heard the emperor's voice before. The war was over. The atomic bombs had achieved what military planners believed would have required a ground invasion costing millions of lives. Slowly, and against all probability, Yamaguchi began to recover. His body had absorbed 2 atomic blasts and was still fighting. He returned to work within the year. He tried to rebuild a normal life in a city that was itself rebuilding. He had more children. He rebuilt his career at Mitsubishi. From the outside, his life looked like a recovery, but he was not the same man who had left for Hiroshima in July 1945. He suffered from nightmares and psychological trauma that never fully left him. He began writing down everything he remembered. He felt a growing need to tell people what the bombs had actually done to a human body and to a city. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was not the only double survivor. The Japanese government eventually identified at least 165 people who had been present at both bombings. They were called Niju Hibakusha. Many were workers and soldiers who had been in Hiroshima on assignment and returned to Nagasaki before the second bomb fell. Most double survivors died in the decades that followed from radiation-related illness, poverty, and old age. For decades, the Japanese government refused to officially recognize the double survivors as a separate category. Survivors faced bureaucratic barriers when seeking support and medical assistance. As he aged, Yamaguchi became increasingly outspoken. He began giving interviews, speaking at public events, and pushing the government to officially acknowledge what had happened. In 2009, at the age of 93, the Japanese government officially registered Yamaguchi as a Niju Hibakusha, the only person in Japan ever to receive that formal designation. He traveled internationally to speak about his experience, including an appearance at the United Nations, where he called for the global elimination of nuclear weapons. He published a memoir about his experiences. He wanted the record to exist permanently, in his own words, before he was gone. He visited schools and told students what it physically felt like to be 3 kilometers from an atomic blast. He described the white flash. He described the silence that followed. His message was always the same: nuclear weapons must never be used again. He had seen what they did to human beings, and he would not let the world forget. In January 2010, Tsutomu Yamaguchi died at the age of 93 from stomach cancer. His family was with him. His death made headlines around the world. For many people, it was the first time they had heard his name or his story. He had been born in 1916, survived both atomic bombs in 1945, waited 64 years for official recognition, and died in 2010. In Nagasaki, a memorial exists for the Hibakusha. Their testimonies are preserved so that future generations can hear them directly. Today, There are approximately 12,500 nuclear warheads in existence across 9 countries. Each one is many times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bombs of 1945 were the smallest nuclear weapons ever used in warfare. Modern warheads can be up to 3,000 times more powerful. Yamaguchi spent his final years arguing that the existence of nuclear weapons was the single greatest threat to human civilization. His memoir and testimonies are still read in Japanese schools. The generation that lived through the bombings is almost gone, but their accounts remain. He was an ordinary man, a naval engineer who designed tankers, a husband and a father. He had no reason to end up at the center of either bomb, but he did. And he chose to turn that impossible experience into something that might matter. He chose to speak rather than stay silent. The most extraordinary thing about Tsutomu Yamaguchi is not that he survived 2 atomic bombs. It is that he survived, recovered, raised a family, and then spent 40 years telling the world something it did not want to hear. He could have stayed silent. Many survivors did. The memories were too painful, the world too unwilling to listen. Most of the double survivors are gone now. The last direct witnesses to nuclear warfare are disappearing with each passing year. What remains are their recorded words, their memoirs, and the accounts they gave before they died. This is what they left behind. Nuclear weapons are the only technology ever created whose sole purpose is to destroy entire cities full of human beings. Yamaguchi knew what was inside that cloud because he had been inside it twice. In his UN address, he said that the experience of the 2 bombs was a gift, not to him personally, but to the world, because no one who truly understood it could ever want it to happen again. Every city you have ever lived in, every person you have ever known, looked exactly like Hiroshima on the morning of August 6th, 1945. He was just walking to work. And then the sky turned white.